What if we're not only predictably wrong about the world, but also systematically wrong? So much so that we're reliably worse at knowing the world as it really is than a random multi-choice guess or monkey with a keyboard. Well, that is the world we live in, and the one that the author and public health doctor, Hans Rosling, guides us through in his wonderful book, Factfulness.
So how's this going to help me get shit done?
Well, that is a good question. If we are to have a positive impact and do something with meaningful outcomes, first we need to see the world for what it really is. Why? So that we can accurately map and track cause and effect. Be the cause, record the effect, and track the trajectory to ensure that it is the trajectory you'd hoped for.
Hell yeah.
Right, so we'll map it out for today. So we're going to talk about our 5 key takeaways from this book written by Hans Rosling, his wife and his daughter. So he's a public health and epidemiology doctor who was involved across his career and life before he died, a couple of years after publishing the book, in preventing outbreaks of diseases like Ebola and optimizing healthcare systems in the poorer regions of the world. And anyway, we'll get into it right now. Takeaway number 1 of our big 5 takeaways: your intuitions are usually wrong, but that's normal. So the big idea here is that humans are hardwired to misread the world. And it's not because we're stupid, but because our brains have evolved for survival and stories, not statistics and data. Hans Rosling starts every chapter by exposing the ignorance of supposed experts in the field that the chapter's on, be they WHO employees, Davos World Economic Forum attendees, or doctors. He does this by pitching to us, the reader, the same question that he's pitched to these experts, and that'll have an A, B, or C multi-choice options, such as 1. In all low-income countries across the world today, 2016, how many girls finish primary school? A, 20%, B, 40%, and C, 60%. He gives us a bit of time to think about it, and then he presents the answers as answered by the experts.
I was going to guess 20%, please. There's a heck of a lot of these countries. So I'm assuming, quite sadly, that only 20% girls finish primary school.
Yeah, so you're a fool. You're the exact type of fool who should pick up the book, read the book, and enjoy the book. In 2016, the answer was C, 60%. I think I would have fallen for A or B. I can't remember the first time I picked the book up, which one I said. But this is what he's talking about. We have this distorted worldview again and again and again, exposed through these questions that he's taken to these panels of experts and had them answer, that actually we tend to do worse than if we'd have just closed our eyes and picked one of A, B, or C, or the monkey with the keyboard. So the answer to that one is 60%. And so, yeah, that's super interesting. He goes on to say, we are systematically wrong about the world. That is why it's so hard to act rationally, because acting rationally would come from us knowing what's actually going on in the world. And we don't. We have this reality distortion that's partly our emotions and partly what the media feeds us and how, how we receive our inputs from the world and the data we're exposed to is an incomplete picture. So that's really worth knowing. And the life lesson to be taken from this is that humility or the capacity to admit to being wrong is a productivity tool. The faster we can admit my intuition might be wrong here, the faster we can learn, adapt, and then hopefully improve our decision making. When doing this, I think of Ricky Gervais when interviewed and asked about his atheism and how he explains it to his religious friends. He says something along the lines of, there have been 10,000 gods across history. You already don't believe in 9,999. I simply don't believe in the other one either. I think about this in terms of our ignorance. There are, some absurd, essentially approaching infinite number of things we could know. We know very, very few of them. We practically know nothing about 99.9% of all the things there are to know. If we then also say, well, maybe there's more to learn on that other bit that I do feel quite good on, then I think this is quite a good start point for hopefully seeing the world for what it is and being able to take in new data that's been sort of thoroughly researched and backed up, rather than disregarding it because it doesn't fit our pre-existing worldview. Samuel, anything to come in on there?
No, I think it's quite telling, isn't it? Like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was very pessimistic about that previous question. I kind of thought, hey, you hear all these horrible stories, these sad stories, but clearly there's a lot that we don't know. To think of 99.9% of things in the world we don't know, we must appreciate that we don't know. Like, it's almost strange, isn't it? Because we're almost told by social media that our voice is worth something, our opinion is worth something. But if we sit back and think for a second, actually, maybe I don't actually know very much on that topic. Perhaps most of us regularly will be coming from a point of ignorance as opposed to a place of factfulness. So, with that in mind, shall we test out how good our listener is at understanding the world around them with a few simple questions?
Fire them off.
All right, then. So, he talks a little bit about trends. Okay, so here's a question. It's on the global poverty trend. Question 1. In the last 20 years, the proportion of the world's population that's living in extreme poverty has almost doubled. That's A. B is remained more or less the same. Or C, almost halved. So do we think it's increasing, decreasing, or remaining the same? Okay, so the crazy reality is it's almost halved. The proportion of the world's population living in extreme poverty has almost halved. So that's really, really positive. I think, we see a lot of things about how much the world is falling apart. And the reason why experts fail is because most people, including experts, believe that it has doubled or stayed the same, incorrectly assuming that poverty is increasing. The second question is world life expectancy. So, what is the average life expectancy in the world today? A, 50 years, B, 60 years, or C, 70 years? Okay, 50 years, 60 years, or 70 years. How long, on average, is the life expectancy around the world? You're going for, Owen's going for 70. Now, as a doctor, this feels like something kind of in your wheelhouse. And in fact, you were correct. 72, in fact. So even higher than 70. So yes, many experts believe it's lower than 50 or 60, reflecting an outdated view from decades ago. All right. The third one is population growth and education. So how did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the past 100 years? Okay, so more than double the amount of people died from natural disasters now than they did 100 years ago. They remained roughly the same, or they've decreased by half. So half as many people died from natural disasters as they did 100 years ago. What do you think?
I'm going to go for remained the same.
Okay, so you'll be very pleased to hear that it's also decreased to half or less than half.
Which is wild given the population growth of the world in that time.
Isn't it just? So, yeah, this is the reason why, we assume it's possibly to stay the same or more. As you said, maybe it's think about overpopulation. There's more people here. But also we have a negativity instinct, apparently, which where people overestimate the impact of natural disasters because they're heavily reported in the media. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know how many you, dear listener, got right or wrong, but just to kind of set the record straight on a few things and just highlight that perhaps things are moving in the right direction as the data shows. Cool. I'll let you come in on your second takeaway, O.
Yeah. And I really liked it in terms of just how that sort of reads and how it breaks up quite a fact-heavy non-fiction book, makes it interactive, and it gets you engaged. So I liked that. Anyway, we're going to move on to my key takeaway number 2. And it sort of builds off the back of that. The world's getting better, even when it doesn't feel like it. So the big idea here is that progress is real, but the gradual progress, particularly the very glacial gradual progress, never makes headlines. Only the aberrations from the trend do seem to. And so basically to do this, you have to be able to hold two seemingly contradictory thoughts in your head. The world is bad, still bad things happen, but it's getting better. So extreme poverty still exists. Children still die of not having access to basic medication and healthcare. Infectious diseases still kill lots of people. But the picture, as sort of explained in the previous one, is getting a lot better. So I think basically what this asks to do is make us sort of look beyond that emotive reasoning of, I feel, therefore I know. I feel the world is falling apart, therefore it's getting worse. Well, actually, we should ask ourselves, what does the data suggest? Though there's a feeling, because the news outlets are competing with each other to garner our attention and eyeballs, and they've found that fear, anger, and outrage are effective, that things are getting worse. Is it actually? By what metric? And for whom? For some people, it probably in 2026, unarguably, is getting worse. But overall, perhaps for a lot of people, it's not. It's not a claim that everything is good. It's a claim that things can be bad and improving at the same time. And so, the lesson here, I think, is that hope that's grounded in data, or optimism grounded in data, should be more motivating than despair driven by vibes, because there's that tangible reality of those numbers that back up that hope or that optimism. If the numbers point towards despair, then fair enough. But if it's the vibes that's leading you in one direction or another, then it might not actually be linked to anything underlying or real that's happening in the world. So yeah, that's good, basically.
I like that line. Things can be bad and improving at the same time. Is that more like at the micro macro level? So things might be a little bit stressful right now for you, but generally we as a civilization, a population, are moving in the right direction. Is that what it's getting at?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's probably just telling us to, as we're going to get on to, one of the other things he talks about is you should never look at numbers in isolation. You should always ask for another one, and you should try and add context to a number. And one of the facts that he brings up, and I'm going to get it wrong because I've not written it down, is about child mortality. And it says something like in 2013, 4.5 million children died whilst still a child. On its own, that sounds awful. But then if you put that in a historical context of what it was like 100 years ago, you realize 4.5 million people dying in childhood is bad, but it's a lot better than it used to be. So I think it's trying to maybe ask us for more perspective than we're capable of without looking at data, because we've only existed in this moment. It's only by using numbers to make historical comparisons that we can know that actually things are getting a lot better, and therefore there might be something in the ointment that is making things better. It might not be despair at the situation we're in now, rip everything up, change everything. It might be figure out what's working, figure out what isn't, and do more of what is and less of what isn't.
Yeah. I mean, similar. I guess a similar story with those. Was it less than half the amount of deaths from natural disasters? The fact that there are any deaths from natural disasters is really sad, and of course, it's going to make the front headlines of the news outlets or social media or whatever. But for us to remind ourselves, it was more than double that in the past. Yeah, back to that line. Things can be bad and improving at the same time. All right. What's number 3?
Takeaway number 3, the media feeds your fear because the fear grabs attention. So the big idea here is that we're swimming in a river of outrage and catastrophe because that's what effectively captures our clicks. And we've entered the realm of malalignment. Basically, the news broadcasters want to basically capture our eyeballs, skewer them, and keep hold of them to sell us advertising. That's not what the news used to be about. It used to be about informing people of contemporary events and then moving on and being just a portion of people's lives. And you'd flick on the TV at 9 and you'd be done by 9:30 or something like that. So it's unfortunate that because they're all about attention, they happen to figured out that one of the best ways of hooking our attention is to stoke fear, outrage, and anger. And Hans Rosling in the book describes something along the lines of the media would have you envisage me as my foot. Sure, my foot is a part of me, but it's not the prettiest part. In fact, it might be the ugliest part, or something along those lines. So the media will again and again just sort of keep bringing up the ugliest parts of humanity because it works and it grabs our attention. And if that's where we build our worldview from, predominantly, if we're terminally online, then we might not have a very high regard for humanity. So just knowing this and knowing that they overemphasize rare events like plane crashes, natural disasters, or acts of, horrific violence guards you against that growing sense that these things are more common than they are because they're very memorable. Think about the flip side in all these situations. When a plane lands successfully, that's never going to make front page news. A natural disaster that doesn't occur, a volcano that goes another day without erupting, again, that's not going to get pushed in front of rivals because it's not going to garner attention. And then, all the many acts of kindness or even just tolerating one another and avoiding violence, they don't make for attention grabbing clickbait, essentially. So the meaningful productivity lesson in that is what you pay attention to shapes your inner world, and curating that information diet such that it hopefully resembles the real world is a good idea. And cutting down on the amount you consume that makes you sad, mad, or angry is not necessarily just an act of avoidance. It's mental hygiene. It's pretty good for you because other than the stuff in your immediacy you can do something about, most of this stuff is sort of beyond one's powers to effect change with anyway. And it's never been easier to stay abreast of it all. So we don't need more. We need some control and some degree of seeing the world for what it is.
Lovely stuff. Yes, we do. It reminds me of this quote, and that is that the news and in reality, 21st century update and social media is in the business of making somebody else's problems your problem. That's to say, as you said, they try and stoke fear, outrage, and anger. And honestly, a lot of these things don't impact you directly. I myself have been consciously improving my own info diet. I'm still somewhat of a slave to the algorithm in some respects, but Reddit has been a great help, and in particular one subreddit, which is the r/Good News UK subreddit. So yesterday, when I was preparing for this, just took the top 3 headlines. The first one is demand for UK rental properties drops as buying houses becomes more affordable. Trump says London is unsafe. Its murder rate is at a historic low. That's from the New York Times. And families of children with cancer to have travel costs covered from 2027. That's BBC. All of which are positive news stories. They're things that show that the world is getting a better place. To be honest, the top 2 are actually talking about trends going in the right direction, talking about data itself, as opposed to a particular person's affected life. So none of those are going to outshine the fear and outrage that the Epstein files can create, but they're going to put you in a much better mood and remind you that all is not lost. And generally, as a population, we're moving in the right direction. Another simple way to kind of like hack your own info diet is to either stop using social media, easier said than done, or just be very conscious of what you interact with. If you know there is a particular topic that's going to get you outraged, it's going to get you, sharing and commenting and getting into a debate with either a bot or a troll, neither of which are worth your time, perhaps instead of that, why don't you just make a donation, a small donation to a particular cause, and don't interact with that post? The algorithms are basically designed to give you more and more of what it thinks you like. So by interacting with a post, you're going to get more and more on that particular topic. So yeah, just be very conscious of that. Maybe that's way to do it. You don't actually have to donate. But if you really do feel strongly about a cause, perhaps that's the right way to do it. You can perhaps help move that cause forward, but also not have it rammed down your throat every time you go onto Instagram that, whatever the topic that you feel so strongly about is being discussed, or there's some sort of fight online for. So yeah, just a few thoughts on how you can hack your input diet.
Yeah, and I guess off the back of that, thinking about controlling your informational diet and controlling getting lost in the weeds online. This book is about using data to test assumptions and bust myths, essentially. Maybe it's worth testing that assumption or busting that myth of how effective and productive getting lost in the weeds, battling against trolls and or bots actually is. I don't know how much data we have to suggest that Twitter threads debating, insert hot topic, clickbait, rage item. The Twitter debate actually steers any real world outcomes. If it did, okay. Do we have any evidence to suggest it does? It's been around a long time. Anyway, I reckon we'll move on. But that's quite interesting, actually. And I think it's really, hitting home the point you were trying to make is that those three headlines that you've just read out, they've got such low virality. I was completely surprised to hear all of those things. I had no idea in all three cases. But anyway, we go forwards. Takeaway number 4, averages lie. Look at distributions, not headlines. So the big idea here is that we basically have this preference for this binary thinking of black and white, us and them, rich and poor, developed and developing, global north, global south. And basically, if you look on the bubble charts or graphs that are published in the book, we have these false binaries, or this, blinkered black and white view of the world into which very few countries fit. So Hans Rosling publishes these bubble charts, and it'd be a bit like going on Our World in Data, which is a wonderful website, where we think about these things where we kind of, in our mind, we put things into 2 neat boxes. And he basically explodes the boxes and shows that most of the time, most of the data is spread around somewhere in the middle. And basically, the global south, so to speak, is not one sort of united entity. Some countries have made lots and lots of financial progress. Others have made good healthcare progress. Usually they go hand in hand. Most of what we consider the global south now is well ahead of what Western Europe was in like the 1930s. So we kind of need to update the model, basically, and try and get rid of these binary thoughts of yes, no, 0 and 1, and replace them with sort of gradients, ranges, distributions, and things that basically are unattractive because they're full of nuance and complexity. The take home from this is that binary thinking goes into that tribalism of us, them, and it creates sort of targets and enemies. Whereas thinking on a gradient is maybe less adversarial. It's not us and them and the enormous perceived distance between the two. It's more like all we see out ahead of us is this sort of line with a few aberrations of there's all these different countries that all scored differently on this metric, whatever it is, life expectancy, all laid out ahead of us. And it's almost like hopscotch or stepping stones from bottom left to top right on the graph of, you've got your traditional Western developed ones kind of smattered around, but then you've got things that kind of don't fit in either model, like the UAE is up there as well, and things like that. And then you've got outliers as well. Yeah, so I think that's just a good idea, really, that if you want to see the world for what it is, then you need to think in spectrums and ranges rather than in blacks and whites.
Like, is that, to use an example to throw right in the middle of this spectrum rather than a black or white country, is it Bhutan? Is that the country where they like have a huge emphasis on measuring their national happiness rather than their national GDP? So sure, like if you plotted them on a scale of where their GDP was, like it'd be right near the bottom. However, if you were then on the other axis to plot where their happiness level was, if you were to compare that against a Western developed democracy, you might be pleasantly surprised to see how much further ahead it is. It doesn't fit into the natural model of like poor equals sad. It's more like, okay, cool. So they maybe don't have highly developed infrastructure, but they do have a really positive work-life balance, and they do have lots of social time, and they have, positive, I don't know, life expect. I don't know exactly what it is that leads to that
Nature bathing,
particular
I imagine.
happiness.
I don't know.
Nature raving, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So
They also,
so yeah,
that's an interesting one because they also are falling quite fast as they open up and sort of kind of become more inoculated by Western ideas and consumerism and capitalism. Once you start playing a game that you're really far behind at, such as consumerism for a very poor country like Bhutan, you can maybe end up with this comparison is the thief of joy situation where expectations have now become really, really high. Your reality has pretty much stayed where it is in terms of material possessions and things, but your expectations have gone through the roof because you've been exposed to all these glitzy, glamorous tourists. They're coming in and have all these things that you don't, and they can do cool things. Bhutan's a very interesting tangent that we could explore more. But yeah, I think Hans Rosling's point here really is that basically the old binaries, and I was thinking black and white, not in a literal color sense, but I guess that might apply to quite a lot of places. Like it's all just 500, 5,000 shades of gray, and probably ever more so. He uses these graphs to show the birth rate of women over time, and he's got back in, I don't know, 1930 or something, there's two boxes. There's developed and developing. And then he shows the same graph in 2013. And there's about 6 countries left in the developing box from the original graph. And then everyone else is jammed up in developed by our old standards. So we do have to update as we go. But I also think with the Bhutan thing, there's so much sort of context or unquantifiable things that sort of score points there for happy. And Hans Rosling does say something that sort of, I guess, caveats his own worldview of more data is better. And that was that the world cannot be fully understood through data, but it can't be understood without it, or words to that effect. So we need to know the numbers, but we need to understand where they're coming from, who made them, and how they compare to other numbers and things like that. I think you had something to say.
no, I totally agree, mate. From to takeaway number 5.
Takeaway number 5. Yeah, so this is the fifth and final one, and that hopefully will wrap up everything. Factfulness is a skill and a moral responsibility. So clear thinking isn't just about being correct, it's about mapping reality correctly so that you can do good in an effective way, not just feeling good about what you've done, but actually adding on or contributing to the world as it really is. And so Hans Rosling says, being able to distinguish between what we know and what we don't know is one of the most important skills in life. He frames factfulness as something that you practice, noticing fear instincts and other sort of psychological trappings and pitfalls that the news and social media will prey on, questioning overly dramatic narratives, and updating our own beliefs when data comes along to challenge them. And he also says something about basically when you live in a resource-constrained environment or situation, figuring out how to allocate these appropriately based on reality is a morally good thing. And then he reminds us that we all live in a resource-constrained environment. So that's it. Truth-seeking is part of how to act ethically and get the good shit done.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about it. I was thinking like it's good to, and I know I consciously have tried to do this as well, is to get into the habit of fact checking things. I really liked what you said there. which effectively, if a story seems too salacious, too like out there, perhaps, it's too good or too bizarre to actually be true. So it can be good for your own sake to have a quick Google, or there's a cool service called Perplexity, which is effectively like ChatGPT, but it cites all its claims. Or another option is Grounds News, which we are certainly not sponsored by, but does like sponsor podcasts. And I'll tell you if the news story you've just read has any bias in it, or at least the news outlet that you've read it through. It can be a good start to truly understand what's happening. Another thought was like, perhaps if you do consider a story, or you hear a story of something really sad's happened, but perhaps it is just a case of zooming out and seeing the big picture. What direction is that data and that trend actually going in? But yeah, that was my thoughts on takeaway number 5. Do you want to see us out? What's the prescription, Doc?
Yeah, consider reading Factfulness. It doesn't tell you or encourage you to be naive or passive, but to recognize and be humble in our shared naivety. It teaches us to be calm without being complacent, teaches us to place optimism where there is reason for optimism, and hope without it ever being blind. And it allows us to move forward productively without feeling panicked or without being ineffective. So, a signal over noise is about separating meaning from madness, which it is. Then this book is practically required reading, though we'd never oblige it, but you probably should. In the next episode, we'll be exploring how to build your own factfulness filter for news, health, money, and career decisions. We'll do our best to figure that out, and you can poke holes in ours, and maybe we'll poke holes in yours. And then, we'll go through the process of workshopping it. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed it, if you got anything out of it, please give us a 5-star rating. Until next time, be well and do good.
See you guys.